Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining the Hyde Park-Kenwood Community Conference Forum on Housing. My name is Ali Amora, and I am a board member with the Hyde Park-Kenwood Community Conference, the organization that's hosting tonight's event, and I will be your MC. We are also honored and pleased to organize this community dialogue tonight in collaboration with the Hyde Park-Kenwood Coalition for Equitable Community Development. We want to give a special thank you to longtime HPKCC board member, Gary Osserward, who is also a CECD board member. Thank you, Gary, for connecting HPKCC with CECD for this event and for your invaluable service and contributions to our community. Please note, everybody, this event is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook. Tonight's dialogue is a chance for us all to come together during this difficult time all around that we're finding ourselves in. It's a chance for us to see one another, to see our neighbors, and it's a chance for us to share how the recent pandemic has affected us all, particularly as it relates to housing for tonight's forum. It's a chance for us to hear from local leaders and community members and to get some of our questions answered. So thank you for taking the time to be with us tonight, including those of you who are joining us for the very first time. Welcome. Before we begin, I'd like to take a minute to tell you a bit about our host organization, the Hyde Park-Kenwood Community Conference, or HPKCC for short. HPKCC is an independent community organization whose mission is to connect people in a diverse, green, and safe community. We convene groups and individuals to network and build community around multi-generational activities, community resources, and major issues that affect our future. HPKCC was founded in 1949 by a group of urban pioneers in Hyde Park-Kenwood facing a radically changing neighborhood who banded together to reverse the tide of physical and social deterioration. Throughout its 70-year history, HPKCC has organized committees and task force to deal with timely issues. The continuing goal of HPKCC is to meet the needs of an ever-changing community, and we exist here as HPKCC to support all of you. When COVID-19 was declared a pandemic, HPKCC knew that it must take action to ensure that community members were informed about what was going on locally and had access to resources they needed. Over the past 3 months, HPKCC has held 3 community virtual events that attracted over hundreds of attendees on Zoom and received even more views on Facebook Live. You can view those recordings on HPKCC's YouTube channel. Tonight's community dialogue on housing is a continuation of that community building and information sharing that occurred during the first 3 events. We encourage everyone to visit our website, www.hydepark.org, to become a member of our organization and sign up to receive updates. Now, before we begin, I'm going to run through our schedule for the evening real quick. First, we're going to hear some brief welcome messages from HPKCC President Phylon Crawford, as well as welcome message from CECD President Linda Thisted. After that, we will welcome 2 speakers who will provide us with an overview of the impact of COVID-19 on housing in our city and community, and then the responses to the pandemic by the city of Chicago as it relates to housing. We'll have a question and answer session with those 2 speakers following. Once that is over, we are also joined by several experts in housing who will speak to resources and protections for renters and homeowners during the current crisis. And then we'll conclude tonight's event with a question and answer session. A note on questions. So questions for the speakers have been provided in advance or they were submitted by you, the participants, in advance, and we'll address those questions first. We will, however, be taking questions through the chat function as the evening progresses. We can't guarantee that we will get to all the questions, but we will do our best, time permitting. So please put your questions in the chat function, and we will do our best to get to as many of them as we can tonight. As a reminder for all of our participants, please remember that this is a public forum. Out of respect for all the participants, please use appropriate language and keep your questions and comments brief and to the topic at all times. HPKCC reserves the right to mute or remove participants for inappropriate comments or comments that do not relate to the topic at hand. Once again, we are recording and live streaming this event on Facebook. And I want to take a moment at this time to acknowledge all that's been happening in our city and country these past couple of weeks. We want to take a moment to remember and acknowledge the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and those whose lives were taken because of their skin color. Today and for the days to come, we mourn the loss of their lives and we honor them and we speak their names. And we also do that by centering Black experiences and Black stories. Why? It is because Black lives matter. So thank you once again for being with us. And now at this time, I'd like to introduce HPKCC Board President, Phylyn Crawford, who's going to share a few words on behalf of the board. Thank you. Phylyn.
Hi. Thank you, Ali, and good evening.
Thank you.
I am Phylyn Crawford, President of Hyde Park-Kenwood Community Conference. Welcome to our COVID-19 Community Dialogue on Housing. Thank you for your participation. The COVID-19 crisis continues to bring uncertainty over our quality of life. Its potential on housing looms large. Instability in the housing market can dramatically impact renters and homeowners. I've been both. We appreciate the speakers who have joined us to discuss the health crisis as it relates to housing and to talk to us about resources to help the community. Please support the work of the conference. Join, volunteer, donate at hydepark.org. Now I'd like to introduce Linda Thisted. Linda is president of the Coalition for Equitable Community Development. Hi, Linda.
Hey, Phylyn. Hey, Ali. And thank you so much, HPKCC, for organizing this forum. For those of you who don't know CECD, we have been around since 2008. We are based in Hyde Park, but we are advocates for affordable housing in the surrounding communities as well. In the past, we've worked on getting more than the minimum amount of affordable housing in new developments like City Hyde Park, View 53, Solstice in the Park. And more recently, we have been working on getting a mixed income, independent senior living building for Hyde Park. But when COVID-19 hit, we had to pivot. And as Phylyn said, this health crisis could easily become a housing crisis. And so we are really happy to share some of the information that we have with all of you and hope that together we can make a difference in keeping our community housing stable. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. We're going to go right into our program. I'm going to introduce our speakers. We have Jeff Smith. Jeff comes to us from the Institute for Housing Studies at DePaul University. And we have Anthony Simpkins, Managing Deputy Commissioner for the City of Chicago Department of Housing. And I'd like to say good evening to Jeff. And Jeff, can you go ahead and introduce yourself and give us a few of your remarks?
Good evening. Thanks for the invitation and the opportunity to participate. So I'm just going to share my screen. Can I share my screen here? I have some, just so I could walk through some basic data that we have put together to help folks try to understand better the potential economic impacts that the housing market impacts that a COVID-19 related economic downturn may have on the city's housing market. Let me see if I can find this now. It's never where you want it. So I come from a place called the Institute for Housing Studies. We're based at DePaul University. We collect a lot of data on different types of housing market activities, use that data to produce different types of applied research products. that help housing and community development stakeholders be data informed as they build and implement strategies to preserve affordable housing or help low-income renters or homeowners stabilize communities. So this analysis, as I mentioned, was really intended as a starting point to help folks understand how a COVID-19 related economic downturn may affect different aspects of the housing market. What we did was identify a set of occupations that were particularly vulnerable to layoffs in the initial phase of the shutting down, so to speak, as sheltering in place orders began to roll out. These are the types of occupations that were really not able to work remotely, and so they were the most vulnerable to the first wave of layoffs. So these types of occupations include cashiers, retail salespersons, janitors, cooks, waiters and waitresses, security guards, construction workers, again, folks who really could not do their jobs remotely. So just to emphasize that this analysis looks at occupations that are vulnerable. So it's not necessarily, we don't really have data on actual layoffs at this level of granularity. We are trying to identify vulnerable occupations. So we believe that this lens is, it was important in the first wave of the crisis and will likely continue to be relevant because a lot of these occupations and industries are likely to be different as the economy reopens and recovers, and a lot of these types of jobs may recover more slowly. So we think that these first wave of layoffs are likely to continue to be among the most significantly impacted. So the analysis that I'm going to walk through looks at households with at least one member in the workforce. This excludes households that are all made up of seniors, for example, or high poverty households where there are no members in the workforce. So this is just looking at households with at least one member in the workforce. And it identifies within those households the number of households or the percent of households that have at least one member who is in one of these vulnerable occupations. And so for this particular cut of the data, we drilled down to a submarket. So the data is based on a census data set, American Community Survey, public use microdata samples. So the level of geographic granularity will not exactly align with Hyde Park and Kenwood. It's going to be a submarket that is essentially the South Lakefront, spanning Bronzeville down to South Shore, which is inclusive of Hyde Park and Kenwood. So it's a bit of a broader geography, but hopefully this will help still people understand the market context. So looking citywide, this is looking at the number of households in more vulnerable and less vulnerable occupations, and then breaking that out by whether or not the households were renters or owners. So if you look on the left, you're looking at the number of more vulnerable households. That's about 300,000 households. Of those 300,000 households, 183,000 or so are renters. That's about 60% of the total, of the total, but 120,000 are owners. So if you look across, you can see that about 41% of renters in working households are also vulnerable. So renter households are more likely to have a member in one of these vulnerable occupations. When we look at this data broken out by income bucket, we see that for renters, lower income renters are more likely to be in one of these vulnerable occupations. So from the previous slide, we know 41% of renters in the city are in one of these vulnerable occupations. We see that if you're earning less than $15,000 a year, almost 60% of renter households have at least one vulnerable worker. Between 15 and 30,000, just over half have one member in one of these vulnerable occupations. So you can see that lower income households are more likely to be in one of these vulnerable occupations. These vulnerable occupations are more likely to be hourly workers and low wage workers. So that makes sense. When we look at Bronzeville, Hyde Park compared to the city, we see, again, 41% of renter households in the city have at least one member in a vulnerable occupation, so about 39% in Bronzeville, Hyde Park. So roughly similar, slightly lower. On the owner side, 33% of owner households in the city have at least one member in a vulnerable occupation, and in Bronzeville, Hyde Park, about 27%. So in general, it looks like a little bit lower level of vulnerability in the South Lakefront area, but still, significant. This map puts that in a bit of citywide context. So if you look, this area 3529, that is the submarket that we're talking about. So you see that it kind of falls in that between 30 and 40% of renter households in that with at least one vulnerable person. We see that on the kind of west side, southwest sides, that's where you see the highest concentration or the highest share of renter households that are potentially vulnerable. And we see, downtown and along the North Lakefront near Lincoln Park, Lakeview, that's where you see the lowest share of renter households that are vulnerable. This slide looks at each of those city submarkets and looks at the number of vulnerable renters, which is the dark blue, and the number of vulnerable owners, which is the light blue. So a couple things you can call out here. One is that it's sorted by the number of vulnerable renters. So Bronzeville Hyde Park has the most of any submarket. So even though the share of total renters that are vulnerable is about the city average, a little bit below the city average, because the neighborhood has so many renters, the number of total renter households is actually quite high. And there's a relatively small number of owners. So but still, the total number of vulnerable households in the Bronzeville Hyde Park area is actually the largest of any submarket in the city. That's because of the large number of renters and large number of renter households. About 80% of the total vulnerable households in this area are renters. And this is just a map visualizing the submarkets with the largest number of renter households that are vulnerable as opposed to the share. So again, we see areas that have a lot of renters. So this is the South Lakefront, this is Uptown, Rogers Park, this is Humboldt Park going down to South Lawndale, which is inclusive of Garfield Park and North Lawndale. Those are areas that have a lot of renter households and also a lot of vulnerable renter households. We thought it was important to include not just the share of vulnerable renters, but also the number, because, depending on your perspective or what you're trying to, understand about the challenge, you might want to know how many households do we need to think about supporting, or where do we want to target certain resources where you're going to have a high concentration of vulnerable folks. So we wanted to show both ways to calculate those numbers. Another thing the data show was that these these renter households that are in these vulnerable occupations came into the current crisis more likely to be already cost burdened than the non-vulnerable households, or households that were not in vulnerable occupations. So you would read this chart to say that in Chicago, of the vulnerable renter households, 47% were already cost burdened, coming into the crisis. This is data from 2018, which is the most current data available, compared to 36%, 37% of the less vulnerable households being cost burdened. So there's a pretty significant gap between those vulnerable households and the less vulnerable households in terms of existing cost burden and potential housing instability. The number is a little closer between vulnerable and less vulnerable renter households in the Bronzeville Hyde Park submarket, but two things to note. One is that it's, the cost burden share is higher for vulnerable households, and also the cost burden share is higher in Bronzeville Hyde Park than in the city as a whole. So, what this means is a couple things. One, obviously, these households are already having, some type of housing cost challenge, so some level of potential housing vulnerability and housing instability that will probably be exacerbated by the risk of this, job loss and economic impact. So further destabilizing those households, that's I think a significant concern that we have about the impact of this pandemic and the economic impact of the recession. And then this is, again, another chart that just shows it's sorted by the number of total vulnerable renters. And then the light blue is the number of cost burdened renters. Dark blue is the number of not cost burdened renters as a part of the total vulnerable renter population, essentially. So again, because of the number of renters, Bronzeville Hyde Park has the most vulnerable renters that are also cost burdened, right? So it's about 50% as a share, and about a little bit over 9,000 as a number. And this map shows, again, the pattern. So there are a couple of areas on the south side. This is Greater Grand Crossing, Englewood, West Englewood, Chicago Lawn. This is Auburn, Gresham, Chatham, Roseland. Those have the highest percent of the vulnerable renter households that are cost burdened, which over 55%. And then just another cut of the data that we thought was relevant to talk about is just the potential race and ethnic impact and disparities that exist across the data for vulnerable workers. I mean, if everyone who's been following this crisis, and I know you guys have had a couple of previous forums on some of the public health impacts, know that this is a crisis that definitely falls along race and ethnic lines, with African American and Latinx households bearing a disproportionate share of folks who actually have the virus, and also who work in certain occupations that may be vulnerable to an economic downturn. So this analysis doesn't necessarily look at essential workers, which are folks who might be in healthcare or other types of frontline occupations. These are workers that are working in industries that are vulnerable to layoffs, which in some cases may also be frontline workers, because again, not all of the cashiers are going to get laid off. If you work at a Jewel, if you work at a grocery store, or some type of essential type of business, you might still be working, but there are a lot of other folks who are working in those like restaurants and bars and whatnot that haven't been able to work. So if we look at individual workers and what types of occupations they work in, again, it's clear that there's a fairly big gap between white workers and the types of occupations they work in, and the vulnerability of those occupations compared to Black and Latinx workers citywide. So citywide, 20% of white workers are in one of these vulnerable occupations, compared to 37% for Black workers and 39% for Latinx workers. If we look at just Bronzeville Hyde Park, really there's only a large enough number of the population's really large enough for white and Black workers to really make this a representative sample, but we can see that the gap is actually quite large. And that's because the number of white workers in vulnerable occupations in this submarket is very low. And I'm guessing that may be partly because of the presence of the university, but it's the gap is even though the African American share is about the same as it is citywide, the gap is much larger because the white workers are less likely to be in these vulnerable occupations. So just to summarize, the findings of this analysis, again, is a preliminary analysis. We don't really have any actual data yet to figure out, there's high-level data on unemployment claims, but that data really hasn't trickled down yet to the neighborhood. So we're really just trying to assess vulnerability and risks. And what this analysis indicates is that this economic crisis is likely going to disproportionately impact lower income households, lower income renters, people of color, and neighborhoods that are already experiencing different types of housing affordability challenges. Bronzeville Hyde Park, there are particularly a large number of renters, and therefore a large number of vulnerable renters and cost burden vulnerable renters in that submarket. And Anthony will probably get into a lot of detail about what the city's been trying to do to support those folks, but there have been federal, local, state efforts to try to mitigate the impact of the economic crisis on renters and owner households who've lost their jobs. But for a lot of reasons, those are going to expire. They're obviously, and if the economic crisis continues, which it is expected to for quite a while, there's obviously going to be a need for ongoing efforts to stabilize, those vulnerable renters in those neighborhoods. So that's my presentation.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. That was very good information. And let's move along to Mr. Simpkins. Mr. Simpkins, give us your introduction and your remarks on the COVID-19 crisis as it relates to housing.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Can you see me? This is indicating that my video is not
You'll
working.
be up in a minute, I think.
Okay.
Yeah,
there we go. Is that it?
Let's see.
Am I still on? Okay, well, notwithstanding the video, because I don't actually have a presentation, any visual presentation. Can you guys hear me okay? Hello?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. Great. Well, hello, everyone. Yeah, my name is Anthony Simpkins. I'm the Managing Deputy Commissioner with the city's Department of Housing. And it's good to be on the panel with Jeff. We work quite extensively with Jeff and the Paul Institute for Housing Studies. They do a lot of great work with the city. They did some really amazing data collection and presentations for us during our 5-year housing plan. So it's good to be on the panel with Jeff. So the COVID-19 pandemic obviously is a major factor impacting issues as they relate to housing. As Jeff said, there are many vulnerable residents in the city of Chicago, people that have lost employment or their hours have been reduced. This puts their ability to maintain their housing at risk. And the city has been working hard to address those issues. As an initial matter, the focus was really on sort of an emergency response. So that included the need to identify housing for those who needed to be isolated and those who needed to be quarantined, and people that were affected by the pandemic and such that they could not stay at home. And we were able to, working with some of the local hotels, we were able to secure about 269 units for isolation and quarantine people that needed to be isolated and quarantined. We've got about 95 of those units that are occupied now. I'm sorry, with another 137 occupied. The issue of people who are experiencing homelessness was also an issue. Our shelter system was not able to maintain the kind of social distancing that would be necessary to maintain people's safety in the shelters. And so we increased the capacity of congregate housing and shelters by opening a number of vacant YMCAs and vacant public schools. We were able to secure about 486 additional congregate housing slots. We also had about 472, we've also put together about 472 units for first responders and healthcare workers that needed somewhere to stay so that they didn't go home and sort of endanger their family members and people that they lived with. So that was sort of the first response. That was really a all hands on deck coordination amongst just about every city department and agency. As it relates to how we address the issues, the issues of housing that have arisen since then, housing instability that have arisen as a result of the pandemic, there's quite a lot of things going on here. So as an initial matter, one of the things we did was we issued a COVID-19 housing assistance grant program. We took about $2 million from some other programs that we had to provide cash grants of about $1,000 each, and so that allowed us to be able to provide 1,000 grants. This was for people who had lost income and therefore were having difficulty paying their rent to maintain their housing. So we had about 2,000 grants to hand out. We actually got applications for about 83,000 people. That grant period is only open for about a week, and we got 83 applications. So that gives you an indication of the need at this time. We also had some concerns about maintaining the stability of existing affordable housing. So these are projects that the city had financed or otherwise invested in, and were mandated to provide affordable housing. There's a number of projects, and they were experiencing obviously the same thing that a lot of private housing providers were experiencing, is renters who were, because of loss of income, loss of job, reduced hours, having to shelter in place, weren't able to pay their rent, and had fairly dramatic reductions in the rental income that was coming in. So we also recently passed authorization through City Council through a program called ERAM, Emergency Rental Assistance Program. And this is for affordable housing, existing affordable housing projects that the city has assisted in the past. It allows us to sort of restructure their debt and their financing as necessary to help these projects maintain the affordability of all their apartments. It allows us to give grants up to $75,000 for each of the for projects to offset loss of rental income, and also to assist with increased costs for cleaning and sanitation to make sure that the projects stay safe. We have recently, obviously, gotten some of the CARES Act money, some of the stimulus money that's come in. That's in City Council right now, as a matter of fact, and we have approval for CARES Act money. We've got about $39 million that's been set aside through DFSS and the Department of Public Health, specifically to address homelessness and those at risk of homelessness, workforce development for ex-offenders and people that are at risk of homelessness, folks that are experiencing homeless now, as well as rental assistance for those who have lost income and are at risk of losing their apartments because they can't pay their rent, or are in the process of being evicted and need assistance with first month's rent security deposit at another location. In addition, through the COVID relief fund money that has come to the city, we recently got approval through City Council for about $20 million for another round of housing assistance grants to assist people, again, that have lost income and are having trouble paying their rent. So significant increase in the amount of resources that are going to that. In this next round, we will also make sure that there is some resources that will be available for those who don't otherwise qualify for federal assistance, such as stimulus checks or unemployment insurance and that sort of thing, who also need some assistance. So we'll make sure that some of that assistance is set aside specifically for those folks. And as a matter of fact, recently, the mayor, in cooperation with the Resurrection Project, just inaugurated a $5 million Chicago Resiliency Fund that is specifically for those folks that don't otherwise qualify for federal assistance, including some of the federal stimulus money that has been given to the city. They're estimating they should be able to help about 300,000 households. That would include those who are undocumented, those who are cash workers, returning citizens, and other folks that would not qualify for some of the direct federal assistance. We also have about $3.5 million that has been set aside for us to provide assistance to homeowners that have lost income and the ability to pay their rent, specifically focused on those who are not eligible for the FHA related assistance through HAMP and through the federal mortgage deferral program that's out now. We have a lot of people, including people that have gone through neighborhood housing services and other CDFIs and otherwise have non-FHA mortgages that they need to pay. So this assistance will be for them. And then we also have about $500,000 that's been set aside to work with some of the local legal services agencies to be able to provide some assistance to people who are in fact in court facing eviction, and who are facing eviction because they have not been able to pay rent as a direct result of loss of income because of the pandemic and because of the state stay-at-home order. As you know, in addition, Mayor Lightfoot announced the Solidarity Pledge. I'm sure many of you all have seen that, where we've come together with banks and lending institutions, as well as apartment owner associations that have made a pledge to work, the mortgage companies have made a pledge to work with their borrowers, including many of the apartment building owners. And the landlords have agreed in turn to work with their residents to avoid evictions and avoid foreclosures, and work with people who are experiencing economic difficulties because of the pandemic to make sure that people can stay in their homes. So we're very proud of the commitments that we were able to receive from many of the banks and many of the large landlords and landlord associations in that regard as well. On the legislative front, we've also introduced two important ordinances to the City of Chicago. One is the COVID Eviction Protection Ordinance. What this ordinance does is if someone is experiencing the inability to pay during the period of the stay-at-home order and the current eviction moratorium, because of loss of income directly related to the pandemic, they are given some additional time and some additional incentives for the landlord and the tenant to try and work out payment arrangements or some other methods to avoid eviction. And so that's going to be we think, a very helpful initiative in that regard. So as you can see, what we've really tried to do is, of necessity, to take a look at all of the ways that the pandemic and the resulting stay-at-home orders and closing of businesses have affected housing stability across the board. So that's for renters, that's for homeowners, and the corollary effect that that has had on both landlords and lenders in their ability to make accommodations and provide some assistance to those renters and those homeowners, especially as it relates to low-income renters and low-income homeowners. So that's really been our focus, is to try and make sure that we are looking at all of the players in this pandemic, and to what extent then can we provide some assistance to all of the avenues where we can provide assistance to make sure we're trying to take care of all of the places where people need help. So that's a quick synopsis of some of the things that we've been doing in the housing realm as it relates to the pandemic. Be happy to take any questions, yeah, there you go.
Hi, okay, thank you, Mr. Simpkins. You answered a lot of questions in your remarks. And then we got a few questions that we sent to you and Mr. Smith a little bit earlier, and then we got some on the chat. So I'll try to get through. I'll kind of alternate with questions. The first one I'm going to ask Mr. Smith. What do you see as the long-term effects on housing as compared with the mortgage crisis of 10 years ago or so?
Good question.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think the big difference is that the last mortgage crisis was really caused by a lot of bad mortgages out there. So that's why you had a wave of foreclosure activity, and that foreclosure activity created a lot of legal challenges around property rights. And I think there was a lot of I think the wave of foreclosures are probably not necessarily going to happen in the same way during this crisis, because you just don't have the same level of mortgages out there. But I do think the big concern is that is similar, is just the nature of a likely uneven recovery. When we saw how neighborhoods recovered from the Great Recession, we saw that neighborhoods that were largely already stable, strong housing markets got through it pretty quickly and were able to rebound strongly. And other neighborhoods just took a lot longer to rebound, and probably were just starting to get back about right now. And so now those same neighborhoods are going to get hit, and those are, looks like the neighborhoods that are going to get hit hardest again. So I think that, you know, trying to make sure that all the progress that had been made over the last few years to try to help those neighborhoods and the neighborhood housing markets recover isn't once again lost, I think is one of the big challenges going forward.
I see. Okay, thank you. Mr. Simpkins, we got some questions about housing stock and that could possibly help with the crisis. One of them was, why does the city allow abandoned homes and apartment buildings to stand empty and to deteriorate for so long? Lots of properties have been damaged from in 1968 when Martin Luther King was killed and there was rioting. We still got quite a few properties on the south side and the west side that are empty that could probably help a lot with this crisis. Can the city speak to that? Like, why are they allowed to stand vacant for so long?
You know, that has been a conundrum for a long time. The city has lots of efforts to try and deal with this issue of blight and abandoned buildings. As you know, vacant and abandoned buildings, they have a really negative impact on the neighborhoods where we find them. They can be sites of crime, they reduce property values and increase insurance costs for surrounding communities. And they often encourage people to move out of the communities. They reduce the attractiveness of investment in the neighborhoods. You know, one of the things that the administration has been trying to do with efforts like Invest Southwest is to bring investment to neighborhoods like the ones referred to in this question, which have been really starved for investment for many, many decades. And, you know, we really need to be intentional about this because what is clear is that if we just allow the market to do it on its own, the market will not invest in neighborhoods, in these kinds of neighborhoods. So we have to have some public-private partnerships that are very intentional about that. In the meantime, obviously, you know, the city, unfortunately, demolishes a lot of buildings every year that fall into this category. Because of the public safety concerns and public health concerns that they represent. But we also have efforts like our Troubled Buildings Initiative program, which is specifically focused on buildings like this, whether they're occupied or vacant, that are a real problem for the surrounding community. They're deteriorated, they have lots of code violations, they're sites of crime, they're vacant and abandoned. And we have reclaimed and put back as active sites of affordable housing over almost 20,000 units since we started that program back in 2003. So we are making efforts in that regard. But as with many things, the need generally tends to outstrip the resources that are available only to the city. So these kinds of public-private partnerships, ways to facilitate focused investment. We have programs like our micro markets recovery program. It was actually started after the last housing crash, where we work with community partners and community residents to focus on really tight geographic areas that have suffered from high foreclosure rates and high vacancy rates. And we bring sort of lots of existing resources together, and we sort of focus our efforts on a tight geographic area. We have seen a lot of significant impact. As a matter of fact, Jeff's group, the Institute for Housing Studies, has worked with us as far as gathering data on these micro markets recovery areas. And we have found that as compared to areas that are not micro markets recovery areas, we've been able to have a significant impact on positive impact on the housing market and the reoccupation of vacant homes in those areas. So there are efforts underway, but of course we need to do better. And like I said, efforts like I think Invest Southwest are sort of rethinking how we can really focus efforts on areas that desperately need more investment.
All right, very good. Thank you. That was a very thorough answer. Okay, Mr. Smith, another question for you. Is your group, the Institute for Housing Study, or any group that you know, monitoring the actual availability of affordable housing during the crisis?
Well, it's a tricky thing because we do track what we call an affordability gap, which is sort of the mismatch between the supply of affordable rental housing and the demand for it. And the gap is sort of the difference. So where there's always much more demand than there is supply of affordable rental housing in all parts of the city. So that's something that we track on a regular basis. Unfortunately, data by its nature is always lagging. So we're not going to necessarily know how this current crisis is affecting the supply of affordable housing just yet. I think that at least at this point, from all the information that we've heard, is that you know, the various government interventions that have been put out there, from unemployment benefits to you know, primarily unemployment benefits, have to mortgage forbearance programs and whatnot, have largely stabilized, you know, key aspects of the housing market in the short term. You know, but I think the clear risk is that once those programs sunset, which is, you know, I think the unemployment insurance from the CARES Act, the enhanced unemployment insurance through the CARES Act is going to go away at the end of July. That's $600 a week additional for folks who are on unemployment. Once that goes away, you know, that's going to create a significant economic challenge, I think, for folks who are receiving that benefit. And without any new assistance for renters or for building owners or for homeowners, yeah, that has a real risk of destabilizing the housing market and having a big effect on the rental housing and rental housing supply.
Alrighty, thank you. All right. Okay, Mr. Simpkins, let's see. A big concern has been a lot of the residents at the building at 7000 South Shore Drive have received a 30-day eviction notice. Mm-hmm. And we're wondering, can the owners legally do that in light of the moratorium?
So I'm actually quite familiar with that particular property. We've actually had quite a number of discussions with the ownership there. They did issue the 30-day notices, but we also know that we're working with them on a very orderly relocation process. There's only about 15 affected units in, I think it's the East Tower of that building. Some are being transitioned into units in the other tower, and some are being relocated to apartments in other buildings. But nobody's being put out in 30 days. There's going to be resources that are going to be made available by ownership to help people with that move and that transition. And we are monitoring that situation, and we're working closely with the ownership.
Okay, so there is help for those residents there.
Oh, yes, definitely. Yep.
All right, very good. Okay, Mr. Smith, let's see. How do you think, let's see. Do you know if there are any requirements, and this might be for Mr. Simpkins as well, for sanitation of public spaces during the pandemic? You know, people are worried about, will landlords, large and small, be required to clean elevators or sanitize the hallways on a regular basis? Or will there be requirements to do that? Do we know that?
I'm going to kick that one to Anthony because I don't really know.
Okay. What do you know about that, Anthony?
No, that's fine. I'm not aware that there are necessarily any legal requirements other than sort of, you know, your sort of basic legal requirements for basic cleanliness and sanitation, you know, no garbage, debris, rodents, infestations. However, the Chicago Department of Public Health has put out guidelines and guidance on how to properly sanitize an apartment building. We have made sure to make that available to all of the multifamily and apartment building owners that our department has any contact with at all. So we sent it out to all the apartment associations. We've sent it out to every building that's in our portfolio that we have any connection with. So we've sent that guidance out. And as I said, one of the programs that we have is to provide some small grants to apartment building owners who are experiencing increased costs related to, in fact, pandemic-related increased sanitation and cleaning of their buildings.
All right, very good. Okay, another question for you, Mr. Smith. A couple of people have asked. They didn't see Woodlawn on your map, so I think they're feeling a little put out, I guess. I don't know. Maybe you could explain why you didn't name Woodlawn specifically and how you grouped the neighborhoods.
Yeah, not to put everyone to sleep with data quirks, but you know, just the way that the data is grouped for this particular data set, Woodlawn is part of the Bronzeville Hyde Park submarket essentially. So we have to aggregate it. So it's one of the number of community areas that were included in the submarket that was part of the presentation, but we weren't able to separate it out because of just data limitations, unfortunately.
I see. So Woodlawn is included in all your numbers there.
It's grouped. It's grouped with it. Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay, Mr. Simpkins, let me see. We have a question on, will the sitting housing programs like Invest Southwest continue?
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, obviously, there have been a lot of resources that have been focused on and been diverted and reallocated to focus on sort of the pandemic-related immediate stuff that needs to be done, and some of the stuff that I talked about, as a matter of fact. But we've also now got some stimulus money in from the federal government, so we're hoping to then be able to. The purpose of that was for states and municipalities to be able to reimburse some of the extra costs that they have incurred that are directly related to relief of pandemic situations. So we're hoping that that will help us. As you know, the mayor was just on the other day anticipating a $700 million budget deficit after having essentially closed the budget gap this last fiscal year. So it's had a significant impact on the city's budget, but right now, at least from a housing standpoint, all of our programs continue to be up and running.
All right, very good. Well, the time does fly when you're having fun here. Okay. Jeff, did you want to give us maybe a few closing remarks? We're getting close to 7 o'clock, so I have to kind of get you to give us some remarks, and then I'll get Mr. Simpkins to give us some.
Yeah, no, I think you know, the data that we've been working on, like I said at the end of my presentation, really does point to you know, the households that are most impacted by this economic downturn are lower income renters. They are largely concentrated in you know, communities on the south and west sides. They are, you know, more prominently people of color who are working in these occupations that are more vulnerable to layoffs. So I think that, you know, with any crisis, the concern is that the most vulnerable folks are going to be the ones that bear the brunt of it, and they're going to recover the slowest. I think that's sort of the way it goes. So clearly, and that's not going to be a surprise to anyone on this chat or on this meeting, but just, you know, I think that the data points to that direction, and just the need to really push for resources from the federal government to and a focus on strategy to help those neighborhoods and those households.
All right, very good. I got one more question for you, Mr. Simpkins, before we can get your closing remarks. Let's see, I've got one. Let's see. One of the chat questions is there any data on how many renters are in arrears? And does the city plan to prevent future evictions?
So that might actually be more of a Jeff question, though. We have reached out to some of like the apartment association, the Chicago Apartment Owners Association, Chicago Association of Realtors, some of our CDFI partners, to understand what their rent collections look like. And it's really all over the board. Some of our nonprofit affordable housing apartment building owners have seen a drop as much as 60% in June in their rent collections. What we're seeing in April and May, we actually saw a decrease, but not that bad. It was, you know, somewhere around 20, less than 30%, just sort of across the board. What we're finding is that those that have affordable housing have seen a larger impact, and I think that's because generally they're renting to more vulnerable populations of renters.
All right, Jeff, did you have any comments on that?
Yeah, just real quick, there's a new census data product that the census developed actually in response to COVID-19 that they do every week called a pulse survey. And this is just a small set of questions that they ask folks and update the data on a weekly basis. And so there's one set of questions on housing. And so one of the questions is, do you anticipate being able to make your next month's rent payments? And not surprisingly, a higher share of lower income renters are fear that they're not going to be able to make their next month's rent payment. So about 30%, I believe, of renters earning less than $30,000 annually as a household income have that concern. So again, this is sort of a blunt, broad data set, but it just, again, points to the vulnerability of these lower income renter households and that they are more likely to be concerned about not being able to pay their next month's rent.
I see. Okay, Mr. Simpson, want to give us some closing remarks from the city and what you're thinking?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm really glad to have been with you guys today for a couple reasons. Number one, I think it was appropriate for me and Jeff to be on at the same time. One of the commitments that we've made is to be more data-driven in how we develop housing policy and housing protocols, housing programs. And as Jeff said, you know, there's a lot of data out there that shows how burdened and how vulnerable very, very low-income households are. So, for instance, you know, we started with a housing grant program of about 6.5 million and bumped that up to 20 million, based upon the kind of data that Jeff was talking about, that the need is out there, and so we needed to step that need up. And also, you know, we made a commitment also to be much more intentional about community engagement and making sure that we are in conversation with community residents on an ongoing basis, so that as we put together housing programs and housing policies, they fit the needs of all of the different 77 communities in the city of Chicago. So it's this kind of engagement that helps us understand what the needs and aspirations are in each of the city's communities. So we always look forward to these kinds of forums and this kind of engagement.
All right, very good. Jeff Smith, Anthony Simpkins, thank you so much for joining us. And we hope you stay on for the rest of the program, because we may have more questions later. So,
yep, absolutely.
All right, Ali.
Thanks.
All right, thank you so much. Ali Amora, back to you.
All right, I am back on. Thank you, Philin. I want to thank Anthony Simpkins and Jeff Smith for that wonderful presentation and conversation. There was a lot of really good information, a lot of great data. I do appreciate when people explain data to me. I'm not a data person, and that is really beneficial for me. So thank you all. Thank you, Philin. And thank you everyone who stayed with us. We are now in the second part of our community dialogue on housing. And our second portion, you know, the first one, we had Jeff Smith and Anthony Simpkins on. We wanted to give you a lot of information about what's kind of happening from a general standpoint, give you some data, talk about what the city's doing. And now we want to move into the portion of our dialogue tonight where we talk about, you know, while staying at home, what are some protections and resources for renters and homeowners? Now, to that extent, we have a few experts on with us tonight. We have, and everyone is there logging on. Hi, everybody. So we have with us tonight Ms. Denerica Brooks, who is Director of the Housing Group at Legal Aid Chicago, Ms. Stacy Young, who is Director at the Preservation Compact, and Ms. Linda Thisted, who is President of the Coalition for Equitable Community Development, and our collaborating organization for tonight's forum. So I want to thank you all for being here. We are going to go in much the same fashion as we did with our previous two speakers. We will turn it over to you all. We'll go about no more than 10 minutes each. And then we'll transition on to the next speaker. We'll hopefully end no later than 7:30. We will reserve the last half an hour for questions and answers. And we have some questions in advance, but just as a reminder to all of our participants, we have the question and answer session. If you're posting questions there or in the chat function, we will get them and see them, and we'll go and do our best to incorporate those into our question and answer session. So without further ado, Ms. Brooks, if you wouldn't mind starting us off today. And you can just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, and take it from there.
Okay, thank you for having me. My name is Denerica Brooks. I'm the Director of Housing at Legal Aid Chicago, formerly known as LAF and formerly known as Legal Assistance Foundation. So we are the largest provider of free civil legal services in Cook County. We litigate cases both in Chicago and suburban Cook County, primarily dealing with clients in a variety of areas: family law, public benefits, which a lot of people need right now, housing, immigration, workers' rights, employment, and consumer-related issues. I want to get started a little bit by talking a little bit about what's going on globally in landlord-tenant law. There seem to be a lot of questions in the last round about what's going on and what people's rights are. So let's start with the CARES Act, which was enacted in March 2020 in response to COVID-19. The CARES Act provides a lot of protection for tenants that are living in buildings that are backed by federally subsidized mortgages. That could be a VA loan, it could be a tax credit, it could be Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. Anything that has a federal subsidy backing it is covered. It's a covered property under the definition of the CARES Act. And what that means is that if you are a tenant in a covered property and you cannot pay your rent, your landlord cannot give you a termination notice. Your landlord cannot charge you late fees and cannot charge you other fees during the moratorium period of the CARES Act. It doesn't expire until July 25th, which means the first date that the landlord can give a notice is on July 26th. Even if there's an issue where there isn't a non-payment of rent, the landlord can't give a 30-day notice until July 26th. So theoretically and legally, no landlord should be given any termination notice prior to July 26th if there is a covered property. We are fortunate to be in Illinois because our governor on April 23rd enacted an executive order, which then said, okay, CARES Act, I understand that these federally backed tenants are covered, but no one can file an eviction action prior to, at that point, it was the end of May. The problem came because under the CARES Act, landlords were still filing evictions. There were dozens of evictions filed every day after the CARES Act was implemented. So all of these evictions are piling up, and piling up. And while there were no evictions being executed, meaning that locks weren't being changed, people weren't being put out, these eviction cases were still being filed daily. So now we actually had that protection that says that landlords are supposed to not file anything after April 23rd. Needless to say, there were still filings after that date. So this is where Supreme Court came in just a couple of weeks ago. I think the date was March 22nd, essentially recognizing that these evictions have still been filed even when they shouldn't have been filed. The Supreme Court of Illinois implemented a temporary measure. And under this temporary measure, any landlord that files a case has to put in their complaint that this is not a covered property under the CARES Act. If they've already filed a complaint, they have to amend those complaints to say, or provide an affidavit or swear in court that this is not a covered property under the CARES Act. If an eviction case was filed prematurely prior to the expiration of the CARES Act, then that case can then be dismissed because it's not in compliance with the law. So that's just a little general background about what's going on legally in our court systems right now. The eviction courts have been down since the shutdown and are not scheduled to open back up until July 6th. At that time, if it's not extended again, we expect to see a deluge of eviction cases, those that have already been pending and continued, and then those that have been filed and that may now be up if they're not CARES Act covered properties. So July 6th, the courts are going to open back up. We don't necessarily know what that will look like at this point. The court has still been open and hearing emergency matters via Zoom, some courts, well, primarily through Zoom. So I think that that is going to continue in some respects once the courts do open back up, but the courts are trying to determine and figure out how exactly that's going to work. If anyone listening has been to eviction court before, you know that you can go in any of the courtrooms in the first municipal district, which is the Daily Center, and see 50 cases per courtroom at a time, starting at 9:30. And these cases, and that's every single day of the week. Every single day of the week. So there has to be something to put in place to manage for public safety, how many people are going to be going to court, if at all, and how we can continue to provide access to justice for those people that don't have technology or otherwise can't go into court for whatever reason. One of the other things that I did want to let people know, because of the questions in the last period, I have 2 minutes left, is that there are resources available for people who have had COVID-related unemployment or loss of income and couldn't pay their rent. The main way to provide that support is to call 311. 311 is the Central Homeless Prevention Center for the City of Chicago. It really branches out and connects you to other organizations that have funds available to you that you can apply for that can cover your unpaid rent or other financial crisis. If you do have an eviction case that is in court, we also have, or there is, a court-based emergency rental assistance program. The court-based emergency rental assistance program also provides funds if you've had a disaster within the last 90 days, financial loss or anything, and these funds can assist you in maintaining your housing. What I will say is that the onus is really up to the landlords to agree to accept those funds. They have to agree to participate, accept the funds, and to allow you to continue to remain in the premises if they do accept those funds. So there are resources available. We're hoping that the city comes through with additional resources because people have been out of work for a long time, but there is financial assistance that the whole point is to allow people to maintain their housing and their tenancies.
Thank you, Denerica. And before we move on, Denerica, right now you said that there's emergency kind of hearings being held. What might be something that just, if you were in court now, what kind of cases are they hearing on an emergency basis?
Cases where there's a threat to the health and safety of someone else.
Okay.
Where if you've harmed someone, you're a threat to the safety of someone else, then you can file an emergency motion to get into court to be heard. But other than that, there are no cases being heard.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Okay, thank you, Denerica. That was really good information. We're gonna move on. We have with us Stacy Young, who's here from the Preservation Compact. And so I'm gonna pass it on to Stacy. Oh, you're muted still, Stacy. One more time. You still can't hear you. Sorry. Let me see if I can.
Thank you.
Okay, there you go. That's better. Yes, there you go.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you so much for having me here tonight. And thanks so much to Denerica. That was a really fantastic and thorough presentation. I'm Stacy Young, and I head up a policy collaborative called the Preservation Compact. We bring lots of different stakeholders together to strategize about preserving affordable rental housing, from all levels of government to nonprofits and for-profit developers and community groups. So we really bring a diversity of partners to the table to think and really focus like a laser on affordable rental preservation. So I'm going to talk for a minute about the work that we do at the Compact, some of the owners that we work with, the rental building owners, the intersection of rental owners and tenants, and some of the resources we believe are important to help preserve rental that's threatened by the pandemic. When we talk about strategies at the Preservation Compact and we think about preserving affordable rental housing, brass tacks, we're really talking about more utility dollars for energy efficiency for affordable rental multifamily housing, property tax relief for affordable rental, shining a light on 2 to 4 unit buildings as an important part of the rental stock and preserving that part of the stock. We've also created different financing tools to take on gaps in the private market. So the private market provides lots of financing products, but there are many gaps left. We created some new financing pools in the wake of the last crash. And just last year, we created a new financing pool to encourage affordability in higher cost markets. The compact is housed at Community Investment Corporation, CIC, which is a nonprofit lender. For the past 35 years, CIC has financed rental owners to buy apartment buildings. These are mostly unsubsidized buildings. Our borrowers are mostly for-profit, small to mid-sized owners. So we're talking about the naturally occurring affordable stock. People like to say NOAA these days. CIC has been financing this part of the stock for 35 years. These owners that we finance are traditional small businesses. Think about the janitor who saved his or her money to buy the 6 flat down the street. These are entrepreneurs, just like the small local businesses that we revere and hold up in other contexts. It's just that these guys own housing. They don't sell cupcakes or fix up bikes. And these small businesses are struggling to weather the storm, just like those cupcake owners and bike shops, except that there's much more at stake, because these owners house our most vulnerable households, which is why we're all here today. And these building owners have exactly the same goals as I'm guessing all of you have and all the community groups have fighting on the front lines. These building owners want their tenants to succeed. Landlords succeed when tenants succeed, and buildings succeed when tenants succeed. The last recession taught us what happens when buildings destabilize because owners stop investing. We saw how quickly the cycle of decline and deterioration happens. And again, at CIC, we're talking about small to mid-sized owners. They know their buildings, they know their neighborhoods. When I'm talking about small owners, I'm not talking about the big nameless, faceless companies with deep pockets. Some rental owners, I found out the other day, or former owners may even have organized this very meeting. So I think there are a lot of people who own rental property and you may not even be aware of it. It's not necessarily their primary job. Many have thin margins and a fragile infrastructure. And if the landlords are vulnerable, the buildings are vulnerable. And again, I don't have to tell anyone here what happens when the buildings start to fail, because the blocks and neighborhoods could very easily follow, as we know. So what do we need to do to stave off the crisis? The Preservation Compact started early, putting together a COVID section on our webpage. So just accessing the resources, being able to sort of cultivate this, a giant fire hose of information. I get so many emails every day, and some of them are really great, a resource for this, a resource for that. It's really hard to figure out what really matters. So we've tried hard to do a good job. So thinking about the resources, but also what should we be advocating for? We need to advocate for a lot, and what should we be advocating for together? So let's start by talking about programs for renters. And let's keep in mind that programs for renters help owners, and programs for owners help renters. I've talked to many people about the expanded unemployment benefits. For a program that doesn't mention housing or rent, this is a pretty great rental assistance program, because any dollars that are flowing into a household are critical. And these expanded unemployment benefits are great. $600 a week on top of your regular unemployment benefit until the end of July. For the low-income person who is already vulnerable before COVID and lost their job, these benefits are great. But when the expanded benefits run out, that person will get the regular old unemployment benefit, and it's only half their old income, which probably wasn't very much in the first place. They could barely pay rent with that. So it's really important that we keep end of July cliff in mind, and that we all advocate for extending those expanded benefits. And for any information, help on unemployment, again, kudos to Denerica and her colleagues, because Chicago Legal Aid, I don't know that much about unemployment. Lisa Palumbo over there taught me everything I know, and their website is an incredible resource for unemployment. And aside from unemployment, just thinking about resources, there's other non-housing supports that can be helpful. People lost their jobs and they need help, but they've never needed this kind of help before. They might need food benefits, SNAP, for the first time. They don't know how to apply. They don't even know it's available. Anyway, you get the idea. There's a lot of resources, and of course, any money flowing into a household helps. And we've also heard a lot about forbearance over the last couple of months. Denerica was just talking about some of those federal provisions about eviction moratoria. We've heard about federal forbearance provisions as well. And I think an immediate thought is, if rental building owners don't have to pay their loan payments, why do they need rent? And it's true that forbearance means you don't have to pay your loan payment this month, but forbearance is not forgiveness. These owners have to repay those missed payments on a very short timeline, and we all know that catching up is easier said than done, especially when things are tight. I also heard Anthony talk about the Solidarity Pledge earlier, which encourages building owners to work out agreements with tenants who can't pay rent. And I know many community groups are telling tenants who are concerned about rent, they're telling tenants, talk to your landlords to try to figure out something that will work. And I'm just gonna say, I keep talking about owners and tenants. Now is the time to share information and to communicate with each other. The more that tenants and landlords talk to each other, the better off they are, the more they can both plan, and the better off tenants and buildings will be. And for tenants who can't pay rent, we know there's a lot, and we know that after July 31st, when that expanded unemployment benefit goes away, we know we need a lot more resources. We need to come together to advocate for real resources. We need rental assistance. We need a lot of rental assistance. The Democratic Federal Heroes Act is calling for $100 billion in rental assistance. The state, this is great, the state just allocated $400 million to IDA for housing assistance. The Illinois Housing Development Authority is our state housing finance agency. That's great. But you work on the numbers a little bit, and I still think it is going to fall woefully short of this massive need that we have right now. Anthony mentioned the city's having a hearing tomorrow about how the city is going to spend their COVID resources. I know there are housing and homelessness groups that are advocating for local jurisdictions like the city of Chicago to deploy their new federal resources toward rental relief. So let's make sure everyone knows we need more rental assistance. Our friends on the federal level and on the local level. And I'm going to say this one more time. I keep saying this, we have to work together. Let's not vilify the owners. They're not all great. I get it. They're not all great, but they aren't all bad. And a surprising number of them could even be your neighbors. So let's work together to get more resources and to get the word out about the resources that are available. Because of course, we all do agree that we need healthy people and tenants and neighborhoods. In this neighborhood, as well as the rest of the city. Thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Stacy. I appreciate that. Was a lot of information, a lot of really good resources. And I'm also, just before we move on, I'm wondering though, real quick, if even for the landlords and the owners who are kind of trying to serve eviction notices early on, as Danica talked about, or who are losing money, is there assistance for them? And maybe this is a longer conversation that we can talk about later on, but that's a question I have in mind. We can maybe keep that and talk about that aspect as well when we get to our conversation at the end.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Stacy. So yes, so now I'd like to turn it over to Linda Fisted, President of CECD. So without further ado, welcome, Linda.
Thank you. I'm going to share a few slides with you. Can you see what I'm sharing?
I can see what you're sharing, yes.
Okay, great. I just want to drill down a little bit on what Jeff was talking about to look at what the rental homeowner mix looks like for Hyde Park-Kenwood, and then within the rental mix, what kind of income levels we're talking about. So CECD did a housing study a few years ago, actually in 2013, and looked at the community area bounded by 47th Street down to the Midway and Cottage Grove to the lake. So what we typically call Hyde Park-Kenwood. And what we found was that renters make up 62% of the households, which means about 12,000 rental households. So we are definitely more of a rental community than an ownership community. If you look a little further, you'll find that there are a lot of lower income renters in Hyde Park. In fact, 47% of the households made less than $25,000 a year and up. $25,000 to $35,000 in terms of annual income represented 13%, 35 to 50 represented 12%, and then the final 28% were households who had an annual income of over $50,000. Now, when people talk about affordability, one of the things that you have to remember is it's affordable to whom? And one of the terms that's, if you're in the business, bandied about all the time is the AMI, or the area median income. And the area median income is the whole Chicagoland area. It's not just Hyde Park, it's not the North Side, it's not the North Shore, it's everything together. So at the time of doing this work, what we found was that of those 47% of the households that were making less than $25,000 a year, they represented 33% of the median income for the Chicagoland area. And as you see, it goes up from there. These I would call the affordable housing in the lower market is what I would call, and I think what's been referred to earlier by Stacy, as naturally occurring affordable housing. Hyde Park-Kenwood does not have, it has a few, but not very many project-based subsidized housing buildings. We do have some CHA housing choice voucher holders that they would be included in that number, but most of these people are in the market, and that's the amount of money that they're paying. Just to give you a sense of what that means in terms of rent, if you are someone who in a family making 60% of the area median income, 60% of the AMI, a 2-bedroom apartment should cost you no more than about $1,200 a month. So there are a lot of apartments out there, and not many of them cost $1,200 a month in Hyde Park. People have talked about rent burden before, and I think this starkly shows the kind of rent burden that lower income renters have in Hyde Park-Kenwood. This slide shows how if you are making less than $20,000 a year, 91% of those households are paying more than 30% of their income for housing. So when we talk about housing that is affordable to someone or anyone, what we mean is housing that costs no more than 30% of your income for that housing. So what you see is, not surprisingly, as the income level goes up, more and more people are able to have affordable housing. So obviously at $75,000 a year and up, only 3% of those households are paying an unaffordable amount of money for housing. At the other end of the spectrum, especially when you're looking at households that are making less than $35,000 a year, most of those people are paying more than 30% of their income for housing. That is going to be a problem when you lose your job. I mean, a lot of people talk about paying 50% of their income for housing. That is a kind of a normal thing for a lot of families. And these are the families that don't have savings. They don't have a rainy day fund. They are living paycheck to paycheck. So when they lose their job, and a lot of them have lost their jobs in the last few months, it's going to be a big problem. Let me just spend a few minutes talking about our concerns, which are that although we have passed some money and created some safety nets, those safety nets are not going to be sufficient long term. Illinois employment insurance ends at 26 weeks, and as someone said earlier, pays about 50% of your income or your past wages. And if you think about it, if you're paying 50% of your wages for housing and your unemployment insurance is 50% of your wages, there's not a whole lot left to pay for food, for anything, for medicine, for anything else. Now, fortunately, the Federal CARES Act did pass. And that, I would say, is an excellent first step, but I would call it only a Band-Aid. It does provide an additional 13 weeks of unemployment insurance, so past the 26 weeks. And it also pays this extra $600 a week through the month of July. So I would argue that we're seeing the calm before the storm. People, if they have money from the CARES Act and get this $600 a week extra, are going to be able to pay their rent through the end of July, probably. But what happens after the end of July? That is what's a very, very much of a concern. I will say that the Illinois legislature that I think was referred to earlier, this Federal CARES Act, it all trickles down through the state, and there has been $396 million appropriated by the Illinois legislature for funding for rental and mortgage assistance. But I will say, having been on a number of national conference calls, the scale of the amount that's needed is vastly more than $396 million for the state of Illinois. The National Low Income Housing Coalition has estimated that for Illinois, that number is probably more like, the need is probably more like $4 billion. So although $396 million is a lot of money, the scale of this problem is vast. So I want to end by just encouraging everyone to push as hard as you can to get the government, the federal government, to pass the HEROES Act. It includes $100 billion in housing and homeless related assistance. This act has passed the House of Representatives, and it is sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk. Mitch McConnell does not want to call it. He is not convinced that any more help is needed, but I'm going to have to respectfully disagree. Fortunately, we have our two Illinois senators are fully on board with the HEROES Act and the $100 billion for rental assistance. So I would like everyone to thank them, to thank Senators Duckworth and Durbin for supporting this. But I will also say that I would like to see our congressmen also support this. Although it's passed out of the House, it's passed out of the House with 154 co-sponsors. So far, Robin Kelly and Bobby Rush are not co-sponsors. So one of my goals tonight is to get everybody committed to sending an email to their congressman, be it Robin Kelly or Bobby Rush, to ask them to become co-sponsors, because this is going to be a huge negotiation and a huge fight. And the more these congressmen and senators hear from their constituents, the more they'll fight for what we think is important. So I'm hoping that after all of hearing all of this data tonight and thinking about it, you will all be willing to do that. I have put up a link on our website, hpkcoalition.org, and I will also put something in the chat box so that you can do it in real time if you feel like doing it right away. And with that, I am done.
Awesome. Thank you, Linda. And if we could maybe, could you take off the screen share for a second? We can get back. Okay, great. Awesome. Thank you so much, Linda. And, thank you for the information. And as you know, we wanted to be also clear that, with, your call to action, you're inviting all of our participants, and that's coming from CECD, not necessarily from HPKCC. Although, I think, many of us individually may have strong support for some of those actions, it is coming from CECD. And we're really grateful to have you guys with us. So at this point, what I want to do is we're going to open it up for some Q&A, and we have some questions, a couple of questions that have come in through the chat, but I kind of want to get back to my question that I had mentioned to you earlier, Stacy. And I'm gonna, I'd welcome you all to, unmute yourselves when appropriate. Like this to be a conversation, so they're not really for one person or the other. The problem that we seem to be facing, as you all so wonderfully articulated, is a really big problem, and it almost seemingly insurmountable, right, without more assistance coming in. And it makes me wonder that, well, what then resources do some of the landlords might have, right? Because a landlord who might be having some assistance of their own, might not choose to go the route of evictions, maybe if they see that support and assistance coming in. So I'd like to open it up to not just Stacy, but to Danica and Linda. If you guys can comment on that, since I think what you said earlier, Stacy, about everyone kind of being in it together, rings true for many of us. So if you guys can comment on that, that would be really great.
Yeah, I get so torn when we talk about evictions because, as you said, it's a real problem for owners when tenants don't pay rent. That is, of course, a real problem. But owners will be the first ones to say the last thing they want to do, especially now, to a good tenant is to evict them. So even if that tenant isn't paying all of their rent, or maybe they're not paying all their rent, but the owners right now, and depending on the markets in which they work, in CIC, we're mostly in low and moderate income neighborhoods. The last thing they want to do is have a good tenant leave that unit because they don't know what tenant is coming in. And an eviction for an owner is a last resort. And so I think for most owners, and I think for other owners, it's sort of business and they're more like machines. I think for neighborhood owners, they recognize it's way more expensive to do an eviction than not. So owners who are sort of trying to make it through this, they don't want to evict their tenants, but they're not getting paid full rent. Everybody has probably heard about the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP program. A lot of the programs that are designed for small businesses either do not work for these owners or explicitly bar these types of owners from applying. And SBA programs historically actually have not allowed people who own real estate to be eligible for a small business assistance program. So again, they can apply for PPP, but it's based on salaries. It's not based on rental income loss. I think that rental assistance programs that are being structured right now by either the state or the city or the feds are thinking about what you just said, Ali, in terms of, maybe there can be some look back provisions to stabilize, that they've already lost rent and income, and looking forward, they're probably going to lose more based on what Linda said, what we know is happening with the unemployment cliff. And so structuring rental assistance to look both back and forward, I think will go a long way. And the owners, look, what's going to fall on the wayside. The first thing is maintenance and improvements, right? They have to pay their mortgage and their utilities and their property taxes. And so, they can sort of scrape by for a bit, but at some point the rubber's going to hit the road. The other thing I would say is, do not forget that 40% of our rental stock is in 2 to 4 unit buildings. A lot of those are owner occupied. And so, and even if they're not, if they're investor owned, again, there are folks who own those 2 to 4s. And so we're thinking about, on the home ownership side, giving some special attention and love to the 2 to 4s owners. And we know from the last crash, we know from national data that the majority of the owners of these buildings are moderate income, they're people of color, they're located in neighborhoods that are lower cost neighborhoods. So the owners are vulnerable in this crisis and their renters are vulnerable in this crisis. And we saw in the last recession, 2 flats got hit really hard for that very reason. And so as we're thinking about, we've talked on this call a lot about renter and rental assistance, but those 2 to 4s are really important, and owner occupants who own those 2 to 4s, we have to give special attention to them as well.
And so I agree with that as far as landlords needing assistance. And that's what the court-based program and the other program that I was mentioning, that's what they're there for. So the 311 homeless prevention funds, those go to the landlord to pay rent arrears, catch the tenant up. We're encouraging landlords to try to work out repayment plans. And then you also have the CERA, that's the short name for it, which is the court-based emergency rental assistance. That's going to pay a few months of rent up to a certain amount. So again, the aim is to try to get landlords their money. There's a third program that I'm not sure how many landlords in Hyde Park will qualify for, but it's the emergency relief for affordable multifamily properties. And these are properties that are really designated as low income properties or have low income families, but there are grants or awards of up to, I believe, $75,000 And so, again, I'm not sure who qualifies for that. I haven't looked into it that much. But the final thing that I wanted to say, and I'm going to share my screen briefly, is that one of the other things is that families may be entitled to benefits and they don't know that they're entitled to benefits. So all of those benefits coming into a household can help a tenant and support that tenant in repaying their rent. So if you go to our website, we actually have, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you can go ahead and share your screen. That would be great.
Okay. So we actually have, share that one. If you go to our website on our main page, if you click our COVID page, we actually have a lot of different resources. If you scroll down, each of these are infographics that let you know how to get access to unemployment, how to get access to public benefits, what your legal rights are. So health benefits and health information. These links are all infographics that can help people navigate through their specific needs. And the last thing that I want to say is that we have public benefit open enrollment paralegals. So we have dozens of paralegals whose jobs are to sit down with you over the telephone, however it may be, and help you apply for public benefits, whether it's SNAP or something else, just to help you try to get more income into your homes.
This is wonderful, and I was going to mention I totally agree with Stacy before, but the website has so much information. And what phone number can you give us the phone number that people can call who are on our Zoom call?
Our main line is 312-341-1070. But you can also apply for services online. We have an online portal where you just submit your information, you'll get a call back. Same thing if you call in, you can get a call back. So there's just a tremendous number of resources on our website for those in need. So just take a glance. I'm sure you can find something that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you. That's really great. And I mean, it has so much information there. And even things like I saw like the SNAP assistance, there's a link for that too. And so thank you, it's a really good resource. And we have in our chat function over here, we've posted the website for Legal Aid Chicago. So yeah, Linda, do you have anything to add to the?
I agree with everything they've said. I would just add that the HEROES Act, if it passes the $100 billion of rental assistance, will be backward looking. Can be backward looking. As it's currently proposed, it is backward looking as well as forward looking. And also it's structured so that the payment goes on behalf of the tenant to the landlord. So you can't just take the payment, run off and buy a big screen TV or do something crazy. It is going to benefit the landlord if it passes. In fact, that's why a lot of large real estate companies are in favor of it.
Gotcha. That's really good. Good to know. Okay, I think let's go to we have a question that came in our chat here, and I think it's an important question. It's what, if any, measures are being made to keep negative marks off a person's credit report? And we'll start with that question because I'm also concerned with, that being a long-term effect, right? If people can't make their rent now, if people are being served an eviction notice, if this comes onto their credit report, is there any special protections, whether that's under the CARES Act or anything else that can help people, like either is it not going on or can people get it off if it's going on? So I will open that up to the floor if anyone wants to take that on.
I can take that on.
Thank you.
So there shouldn't be anything on your credit report for non-payment of rent unless you are actually evicted. Where a lot of people are confused is when landlords do their application process, they are only really looking at public records to see whether or not an eviction for non-payment was filed against you, and they're not looking to see what actually happened. So people think that because they get denied an apartment or something, there's something on their credit report when it's not. It's just in the public record, and that's a screening company that does that. So unless there's an eviction order entered by the court, there shouldn't be anything on your credit report. Now, once an eviction is filed, it does become a matter of public record upon filing. But there are two things that can protect tenants who have evictions filed against them. One is under the CARES Act that pandemic-related Illinois Supreme Court measure that I mentioned, there's a clause in there that says that if those cases are improperly filed, the court can just seal that, which means they seal it from public record. You don't see it. If it did happen to end up on your credit report for whatever reason, you can send that to the screening people and say, look, remove that. The other thing is a discretionary measure that's from the Code of Civil Procedure that says that courts have the ability to seal eviction cases if, one, there's a foreclosure related, and then two, if there's really no basis in fact or law for the case being filed. Oftentimes when we litigate these cases, not oftentimes, but sometimes the landlords will agree to seal the case if you can work out some kind of an agreement. So there are a couple of measures in the statute and in this temporary measure that provide for sealing of eviction records.
Gotcha. That's good. And so just to be clear, so under the CARES Act, if it was improperly filed, and by that do you mean, for instance, if it wasn't supposed to be filed before that date that you talked about?
None of this is under the CARES Act. The CARES Act does not provide sealing of court cases or anything like this. This is all Illinois. The Illinois Code of Civil Procedure, the Illinois Supreme Court rule, this is solely Illinois. So if a landlord filed a case in a covered property on June 1st, and the landlord wasn't supposed to file until July 26th, if that case is dismissed, the court can seal that case.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you, Danerika. Anyone else want to chime in on that? All right. Thank you then. We'll move on to, it's 7:43, so we're going to go for about 10 more minutes roundabout, and before we end up wrapping up for the night. So there some of the questions that we got submitted in advance was that there's a landlord in the area who's requiring tenants to renegotiate their rents to sign non-disclosure agreements. First of all, is there any recourse for tenants to avoid signing that? And I'm not sure if it is pandemic related, but if anybody could speak to that, that was one of the questions we had submitted in advance.
So I don't know. Oh, I was going to say, yeah, please go. Danerika, I defer to you.
Well,
I didn't want to point you out, Danerika, but I was like, you're our legal expert here, but yeah.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, I'm not aware of any case law that says that a landlord cannot ask for a non-disclosure agreement. This isn't something that we actually see regularly in Cook County. I know at some other places it happens at the application level, not for renewals, not for repayment agreements or anything like that. It's difficult to comment on whether or not it's okay because I haven't seen it. I don't know. What I can say, though, is that even if there is a non-disclosure agreement, I think that what it comes down to is whether or not that agreement is actually enforceable. If there are clauses that are enforceable, is it unconscionable to ask someone to sign this during a pandemic in order to maintain their homes and not be looking for another place to live? Is it something where there's a provision asking you to waive rights that you essentially have? So the RLTO gives a lot of tenant protections, right? You're supposed to have a right to call 311 city government officials. You're supposed to ask for repairs to be made. You're supposed to be allowed to organize with other tenants. And if you're not allowed to talk to other tenants, if you're not allowed to contact the city and let them know you have habitability issues, is that an enforceable provision? If it's too broad, the likelihood is it's not enforceable. And the other thing is, if it interferes in some way with the right that you have, it may not be enforceable. So it's hard to say without seeing it, but it really comes down to enforceability.
Gotcha. Thank you. I think that answers it. So let's go on. We got another question that we had that came in was that we've talked a little bit about kind of like what the city has done in response, and Anthony's with us here today, and he's talked a lot about that as well. And want to talk about the moratorium ordinance. I think it's going to be voted on next Wednesday. And we wanted to get your opinions here on, we talked about this variability of, or the variance of renters and landlords and who are landlords and renters, but do you think the provisions in the proposed ordinance are sufficient? Do you think that there are other things that are needed, maybe on behalf of the city? And I do know that Anthony has also given us some more information in the chat that when the city inaugurated the Solidarity Pledge to get commitments from landlords and banks to work with tenants and homeowners in financial hardship, they also made the point that those who were not suffering income loss should, pay their rent and mortgages for the stability of the system to allow room for those who can help. So what other, do you think that the measures are enough if the ordinance goes through? And what do you think might be needed more than that? And I'll open that up to the floor. Don't all jump at it once.
I'm going to jump in. I am going to jump in because, so I'm not an expert on this ordinance. I have looked at it. So I don't know if I have a lot to say about the ordinance itself. I do think that what we need, and I mean, Linda and I swear we don't have the Vulcan mind meld going here, but what we need is more money. Because if there was rental assistance, we wouldn't be talking about this eviction problem, right? What we need is money to pay the rent. This is a social, this isn't even a social, this is a health problem. And we expect that landlords are gonna bear the cost of this. So again, are landlords all great people? No, but are they supposed to absorb the costs of a worldwide pandemic when people lost their jobs and they can't pay rent? To me, should the tenant bear that? Of course not. Should the tenant be put out for that? Of course not. But from a landlord's perspective, they are getting hurt here too. So I'm not saying that there shouldn't be an eviction moratorium. The last thing we need is more people being put into the homeless system. We don't need people being put out of housing. And if landlords can absorb this loss and they can get paid back and they can absorb it, that's fine. But I think it's a problem that we cannot figure out a way as a society, as a government, to figure out a way to help folks who don't have jobs because of a worldwide pandemic to pay the rent. And so, there was an eviction problem before the pandemic. Don't get me wrong. So this is not, I am not in denial. I get it. But at the same time, I would argue that eviction problem before is the same issue. A lot of people couldn't pay rent before the pandemic hit. And again, if I'm a landlord and someone can't afford to pay me rent, I have expenses. So either the government's going to help me pay my expenses, or I'm going to try to find a tenant who can pay rent. If I go to the grocery store and I can't pay for the gallon of milk, I don't, so to me, this is an unfortunate argument we're having about eviction when indeed it should be all of us advocating and figuring out how the government is going to help people pay rent and have enough money to live on.
Thank you, Stacy. Linda, do you want to add to that?
I totally agree with what Stacy said. I think it's a huge problem, and we actually need a serious federal government response. The federal government is in the best position to make this response. It has the lowest cost of borrowing. It can run a deficit. I mean, in Illinois, we're not supposed to run a deficit. Neither Illinois nor Chicago has any extra money to put to this.
Thank you, Linda. And Denerica, do you want to chime in here?
Sorry, I actually can't comment on proposed legislation or ordinances.
Okay, enough
But
said.
money
Thank
is
you.
always a good thing. We need lots of rental assistance.
Gotcha. Okay, well, we're gonna take one more question, and then I think we're going to wrap up. So, or actually, I think what I would ask though is, you guys have given us a lot of information at this time, and I want to know maybe if you can, one thing that you want to leave our participants with, and I know we've had a lot of resources. I'd like our participants who are with us to just go home with that information. So maybe, if we can kind of go around and, before you leave, best resources for our participants here, and advice on moving forward. So we can Linda, maybe we can start with you.
Well, you can check our website if you want to contact your congressman. If you want to see more of the data that I discussed earlier, the whole 100-page report is a link on our website. And I will just end on a note of hope that this is a great community. I think we all love to help each other. We love living in Hyde Park and Kenwood and the surrounding communities. And we are all in this together. And I think if we all work on this and put our minds to it, we can make something happen.
Thank you, Linda. Denerica?
I guess I would part with saying that just make sure that you check our website. There's a lot of information available. There are lots of ways to reach us and to contact us, and try to reach out to us early. I will say that the legal aid community in Chicago is really banding together right now, trying to make sure that we have resources and can provide assistance to families in need if they do receive termination notices or are faced with evictions. And the earlier you get to us, the better, but that the whole legal aid community is banding together to try to respond to what we expect is going to be a devastating amount of evictions.
Thank you, Denerica. And Stacy, any final thoughts and resources that you'd like to leave our participants with?
I mean, I will just echo, of course, rental assistance. I said that enough. Everyone knows that's what I was about to say. But I will say unemployment. And again, this website, Denerica's website, the amount of information is unbelievable. The amount of for unemployment alone, let alone everything else, they help you through the process. They have these excellent visuals, as she was saying, and explaining the process and why there are jam ups. I think it's wonderful. And again, thinking about those income supports as ways to bring income into your household. And if you're an owner or a family member, thinking about folks who maybe haven't traditionally accessed those kinds of supports and making sure that they know that they're available. And also, again, I think really pushing, not just on the federal level, but pushing the city of Chicago. There will never be enough money, but they do have some money, and they are allocating chunks of it to emergency rental assistance and to other types of rental assistance. And I give them a lot of credit, but oh my gosh, we can't have enough. There's so much need.
Thank you, Stacy. And I agree. There's a lot of need, and there's a lot of resources out there. So what I want to also tell our participants today, everything that we talked about. I know that we had a question about can the info on the chat be posted somewhere on our website. That is what we're going to do. So we have lots of different resources here. They will be posted on HPKCC's website, which is www.hydepark.org. All of the information that was discussed today, all of the websites, the phone numbers that we have that you all shared with us, that will be on our website. We will also be sending out a newsletter that will have this information on it, as well as a recap and direct everyone to our website for that. So I really want to thank you all for being with us tonight. We really appreciate the time that you took. All the information that you shared was very beneficial. And at this point in time, I am going to hand it over to our board president, Phylyn Crawford, who can close us out. So thank you all once again for being here. Denerica Brooks, Linda Thisted, Stacy Young. We want to thank Anthony Simpkins, Jeff Smith. Really pleasure having you all. Our community really appreciates it. So thank you. So without further ado, Phylyn Crawford. Phylon, you're muted still. There you go.
Okay, I'm back. Okay, yeah, I'd like to thank all of our participants tonight. I thought it was a really good discussion. Thanks to Jeff Smith, Institute for Housing Studies at my alma mater, DePaul University. Thanks to Anthony Simpkins, Managing Deputy Commissioner, City of Chicago, Department of Housing. Denerica Brooks, Legal Aid Chicago. Stacy Young, the Preservation Compact. Linda Thisted, Coalition for Equitable Community Development. And we'd like to invite all of you to join us for future meetings and future forums. We'd really appreciate that. It's been my pleasure to be the moderator for tonight's discussion. And on behalf of the Hyde Park-Kenwood Community Conference, I want to thank you for joining us tonight for tonight's community dialogue on housing. The conversation does not end today. HPKCC would like your voices to continue to be heard. You can learn more about HPKCC at hydepark.org. And we'd like to thank some other people who have been very instrumental in helping us behind the scenes. Let's see, there's Shazia Papa, who created that beautiful flyer. Iman Ali, our social media pro. Gary Oswald, who takes notes for us. That's very helpful. Again, Linda Thisted, who collaborated with us and organized the forum. Aliyah Mora, board member and organizer. Barbara Barino-Paschal, board member and organizer. Mila Jameson, board member organizer, and me, president and organizer. And okay, we'd like to thank you all and stay safe and good night.